You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin. I was peeling potatoes when she said it. You should go. Her voice was calm, no emotion in it, like she was telling me to take out the trash. I didn't say anything. She kept chopping, not bothering with a look at me. Her mouth tilted up slightly, smug, like she was pretending I wasn't even there. I stayed silent. The kind of silence that said everything. After a minute, I just walked past her, no hesitation. Went straight to the bedroom and grabbed the old gym bag from under the bed. The one I used to take to practice, still smelling faintly like old sweat and leather. I heard her from the kitchen. You'll land on your feet. I didn't respond. I stuffed clothes into the bag, no need to overthink it, just enough to get by. When I walked out, she looked up, probably expecting something, some reaction. A fight, maybe. But I gave her nothing. She just smirked, like she'd won. Scene 2. The paper she forgot. I moved into a tiny rental above a pawn shop. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. There was a metal filing cabinet in the corner. It wasn't locked, but it still felt like it had secrets in it. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the land use contract, the one I'd kept for 12 years. It was faded at the edges, but the ink was still clear. I read every word again, just to make sure. It was airtight. Every clause, every stipulation, it all pointed back to me. The small loading dock they needed for their seafood business, mine, full control, no end date, no conditions, just mine. Scene 3. The deal. I never forgot. I remembered the day I offered the money. Her father had been desperate after a storm tore half their dock apart. I'd just gotten a fat bonus from a security contract and offered to pay for repairs. Over coffee, I told him, I'll fund it, but I want exclusive rights to the dock access. He laughed. Damn fool, he said. Should have asked for more. But he signed without hesitation. At first, they treated me like family. But as time went on, things changed. They forgot. They thought the dock was theirs, but it wasn't. I had the paper that said otherwise. Scene 4. The call that changes everything. I called Rick, my old buddy. He'd gone into shipping logistics and now ran a dozen ports. I laid it out for him, how I had sole rights to the loading dock that fed their warehouse. He was quiet for a minute, then asked, You want to make this painful or profitable? Both, I said. He chuckled. Let's get it done. A few hours later, the documents were in my inbox. His company, Blue Anchor Freight, would buy the rights through a shell corporation. It would look like someone else was behind the deal. By the time they figured it out, it would be too late. I set the gym bag down on the floor and turned my attention to the filing cabinet in the corner. The place was quiet. The hum of the neon pawn shop sign downstairs was the only sound, but it didn't bother me. I didn't need much, just enough space to breathe. The cabinet was heavy, its metal frame scratched up from years of being dragged across different offices, apartments, whatever I could find. I unlocked the bottom drawer, the sound of the click loud in the stillness. There it was, tucked in the back, the land use contract. It was old, but it still felt like a weapon in my hands. I pulled it out and set it on the small kitchen table. 12 years since I'd signed it. 12 years of her family treating me like I was just a guy who helped them when things fell apart. They didn't remember it the same way I did. But I would. I skimmed through it, letting the words sink in. The original date was clear, the day her father had signed it in desperation, with the storm still fresh on their minds. Their docks had been in worse shape than anyone realized, and I'd paid to rebuild them. Paid for every inch of wood and steel, paid for the contractors, the labor, the permits. I didn't need the credit for any of it. What I needed was control. I'd told him what I wanted in exchange, exclusive rights to the loading dock, the only one that could get trucks in and out of their warehouse. He laughed, said I was crazy for not asking for more, then signed the paper without hesitation. I was offering him a lifeline, and he didn't think twice. Now, 12 years later, it was mine. No loopholes, no backdoor clauses. I reread the key parts, focusing on the language of the access rights. I wasn't just a part owner of some operation. They had no say anymore. The docks, the access, the entire operation. It was all mine, full control, no end date, no conditions. It was locked down tighter than any contract they'd ever drawn up. Her father didn't know it yet, but this was his last mistake. The cold air from the open window felt heavier now, like the weight of the contract was pressing down on the entire room. It wasn't just business, it was strategy. The whole damn thing had been set up years ago, and now it was paying off. I folded the contract neatly and slid it back into the drawer. The papers were a reminder, not a threat. Not yet, at least. But when the time came, and it would, there wouldn't be any going back for them. I grabbed the gym bag, slipped it over my shoulder, and headed for the door. The next move was already in place. I remember the day I offered the money. It was right after the storm had torn half their dock apart. The old man was desperate. He didn't have the funds to repair the damage. The whole damn place was a wreck, and their seafood business was barely scraping by. I had just gotten a nice bonus from a security contract, enough to make a difference. I didn't have to think too hard about it. I went to his house, sat down at that old kitchen table of theirs, and offered to cover the repairs. "You get the dock back up to speed. I'll handle everything," I said. But in exchange, I want exclusive rights to the access. His eyes narrowed. He was quiet for a second, then he laughed. "Exclusive rights?" He shook his head, a little amused. "You're a damn fool if you don't ask for more." I didn't argue. I wasn't after more. I just needed what mattered. He signed the contract without blinking, not even a second thought. For a while, it worked out. They treated me like family, like I was one of them. His wife would make coffee in the mornings, and I'd sit with them, talking about the business, the weather, whatever came up. Things felt fine. I was part of the operation, in the background, helping them rebuild. They were grateful, or at least they pretended to be. But over time, things shifted. The gratitude wore off, the smiles got thinner, and then, somewhere along the way, they forgot. They forgot what that contract meant. They thought the dock was theirs. Hell, they even talked about expanding it, acting like they had full control, making decisions about access like the paper didn't exist. But it did, and I still had it. Every clause, every line was clear. It was mine. The day they started acting like they owned it, that was when I knew. They were the ones who'd forgotten. I hadn't. I wasn't about to let them rewrite history. They had the seafood business, sure. They had the warehouse and the trucks and all the suppliers. But without that dock, they had nothing. And I wasn't about to let them forget that again. I had the paper, and that was all that mattered. I picked up the phone and dialed Rick's number. He was an old friend from my days in the security business. He'd left that behind years ago, got into shipping logistics, and now he ran a dozen ports on the East Coast. If anyone could help me move the pieces around, it was him. It rang once, twice, then he picked up. "Rick," I said, "I've got a situation." He grunted in response. "Shoot." I explained it to him, keeping it simple. I had sole rights to the loading dock they used for their seafood warehouse. The dock they depended on for everything. Deliveries, shipments, all of it. Rick was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the gears turning on his end. "You want to make this painful or profitable?" he asked, his voice low, almost amused. I didn't hesitate. "Both." A laugh came through the phone. "You always did like your drama," he said, his tone half cocking that familiar smirk I could picture on his face. "But all right, let's get it done." We talked for a few more minutes, hashing out the details. Rick was smart. He'd been around enough to know how to make this thing disappear and reappear under the right name. His company, Blue Anchor Freight, would buy the rights through a shell corporation. That way, no one would know it was me behind the deal until it was too late. "How soon can you get the paperwork together?" I asked. "Already got it," he replied. "I'll send everything over tonight. You'll just need to sign a couple things." I could feel the weight of it settling in. This was it. Once the deal went through, there was no turning back. But that didn't bother me. "All right," I said. "Get it to me." He hung up without another word. I stared at the phone for a moment before putting it down on the table. The first part of the plan was in motion. I'd never been one to back down from what I wanted. The next day, the documents came through. Rick didn't waste time. Everything was in place, signed, and ready to go. All I had to do was put pen to paper, and the dock would no longer belong to them. It would be under Blue Anchor Freight's control, and in time, they'd have to pay for the privilege of using it. No one would know it was me, not unless they dug deep enough to trace the money, but by then, it wouldn't matter. The damage would be done. I locked the files away and sat back, letting the reality of what I was about to do sink in. This was more than just business. This was how it always had to be. Make the moves when people weren't looking, play the long game, and I was already ahead of them. We met at a small legal office downtown, a place that smelled like old books and coffee. Rick was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table with a man in a gray suit. He barely looked up when I walked in, but I could tell he was ready to get this over with. The notary didn't ask any questions, no small talk, no probing about what I was signing away. He just slid the documents in front of me. The title of the agreement stared back at me in bold black letters. Transfer of exclusive dock rights. Rick gave me a quick nod as he signed first. His pen scratched across the page, and I followed suit. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Just a signature, sealing the deal. The notary stamped the papers with a sharp thunk, and I felt something shift in the air. I picked up my phone as I stood up, ready to leave. It buzzed almost immediately. A wire transfer notification from my bank. I checked the amount. It was there. The money was in my account. The deal was done. All set, Rick said, standing up and shaking my hand. I nodded. Appreciated. I walked out of the office into the cold air, the wind cutting through the thin jacket I hadn't bothered to replace. The streets were bustling with people heading to lunch, not a care in the world. But inside, something had changed. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't relief. It was certainty. I'd just made a move that would start a chain reaction, and I wasn't going to be around to watch it unfold. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't some petty payback. It was strategy. They'd forgotten who held the cards, and now I was playing my hand. That dock had been their lifeline, the only way in and out for their business. Without it, they were stuck. And now, it wasn't even mine anymore. It was Rick's. His company would control it, and they'd have to pay a toll every time they used it. I didn't care how they tried to fight it. The toll fees start next week. From here on out, everything they tried to ship through that dock would cost them, and they'd be forced to pay up. And because I sold it fair and clean, no backroom deals, no shady under-the-table moves, I could sit back and watch it all happen from the sidelines. No one would connect me to it, not until it was too late. By the time they realized what had happened, the damage would already be done. I stepped onto the sidewalk, glancing back at the building behind me, and felt nothing. Not guilt, not anger, just that same certainty. I'd made my move, and now the pieces would fall into place. Game over. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was a short call, no small talk, just her brother's frantic voice on the other end. The fish truck is stopped at the dock. There's a sign. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I could picture it, the delivery truck, waiting for someone to let them through. The dock hands standing by the gate, looking bored, the sign hanging just above their head, crisp and new. Private property, access by appointment only, fee schedule attached. I could already hear the frustration on the other end of the line. They'd hit a wall, and they wouldn't know how to get around it. A couple of hours later, I got a message from Rick. New rules are up. Dock's under lock and key now. Toll fees start next week. They'll figure it out soon enough. I smiled, leaning back in the chair. This was the beginning, the first of many roadblocks. A few hours after that, her dad showed up at the dock in a fury. I knew exactly how it would go down. He'd march in, demanding answers, shouting about his family's rights. But it wouldn't matter. The new dock manager was already there, calm as ever. He pulled out the easement paperwork, the one I'd made sure was stamped and verified. New owners, he said flatly when her dad started yelling. Talk to them. Her father, a man who'd spent his whole life running that seafood business, stared at the paperwork like it was some foreign language. He didn't know what to do with it. The old man wasn't stupid, but this was new territory. He tried to call the city clerk. I'm sure he thought someone could talk them out of it, but I could already guess what happened. He wouldn't like the answer he got. The call came in about an hour later, and I could hear it in his voice. The worst kind of disbelief. It's all legit, he said, his voice tight. There's nothing we can do. It's all in the paperwork. I didn't feel any satisfaction in it. I'd already made my move. This was just the aftermath. They didn't know what hit them, and it was too late now. The emergency meeting was at their house, the place I'd spent countless hours sitting at that kitchen table, talking like we were family. Her father was already pacing the room, a stack of legal documents in his hands. Her brother, always the hothead, was sitting on the couch, his arms crossed, staring at the floor like it was going to give him the answers. They'd printed out everything, the contract, the easement papers, the photos of the locked dock. The lawyer was there too, flipping through the paperwork, reading it over carefully, and giving them nothing. Her father didn't waste any time. This can't be right, he muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. This is our property, our dock. They can't just take it. The lawyer, a calm man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, flipped to the next page. "It's all in order," he said, his voice even. "Nothing illegal, nothing reversible." He didn't say it like he cared. I wasn't sure if he was a little too used to people losing, or if he just didn't like their chances. Either way, it didn't matter. They didn't have the power to fight this. Not now. Her father slammed his fist on the table, his voice sharp. "We'll sue. We'll drag him through the courts. I don't care how long it takes. This is ours, and no piece of paper is going to change that." The lawyer didn't even flinch. "You'll lose," he said, flat as a brick. Her father's face went red. The anger was there, but the realization was creeping in. They didn't have a leg to stand on. All that anger, all that shouting, wasn't going to undo a contract that had been signed over a decade ago. They couldn't just pretend it wasn't real. Her brother, who'd been sitting there in silence, spoke up. "We can still force a truck through, right? Just take the damn crates out anyway. Who's going to stop us?" The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "That's trespassing now? You're better off talking to the new owners about paying the fees." I could almost see the gears turning in their heads. They'd been blind to the power of that dock for so long. To them, it was just another piece of the business, something they used every day without thinking. But now they were realizing every crate, every shipment, every supplier, they all depended on that dock. Without it, they were nothing. Her brother's face twisted, the frustration spilling over. He didn't like feeling powerless, and he didn't like the idea of paying a toll for something they thought was rightfully theirs. But even he knew there was no getting around it. And that was when I saw it, the shift in her face. She was still sitting at the table, arms folded, eyes fixed on the lawyer's paperwork. But for the first time, something clicked. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to, but I knew what was going through her head. It wasn't about the dock anymore. It was about the man who'd held the strings all these years. And in that moment, she realized who had been pulling them all along. It was late when she showed up at my apartment, her hair a mess, eyes wide like she hadn't slept in days. I was just sitting on the couch, a beer in my hand, not bothering to do anything except let the silence settle. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy. I knew she'd show up eventually. She didn't knock. She just pushed the door open, like she was sure I'd be waiting. Her words came out sharp, a venomous accusation. "You did this," she spat. It wasn't a question. It was a certainty, like she'd just figured it out. I stood up slowly, not moving toward her. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her. "You told me to move out," I said, my voice steady, no anger, just fact. "So I moved my assets." She froze for a second, the anger shifting, the fire in her eyes dimming slightly. She knew what I meant. She knew this wasn't just about leaving. She took a step toward me, but I didn't move. She tried something else, softened her tone. "Look," she said, her voice quieter now, almost sweet, like it wasn't the same person who had sent me packing days ago. "We can fix this. We can work something out. Just give me the paperwork and we'll figure it out." I didn't answer. I just stayed still, watching her. Her face shifted again, from pleading to something else, something more calculating. But she didn't push further. She knew I wasn't going to bite. The silence stretched, and I could feel the weight of it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even upset. I just felt tired. Tired of the games, tired of pretending things were ever going to be different between us. I turned to the door. Slowly, methodically, I started closing it. She didn't try to stop it, didn't reach out, didn't protest. She just stood there, staring at me. Her face was unreadable now, maybe a little lost, maybe not. But it didn't matter. She didn't say anything else. When the door clicked shut, I heard her footsteps fade into the hallway, and that was it. It was over. I locked the door, leaned back against it for a second, and sighed. Then I went back to the couch, took a sip of my beer, and let the night settle back into its rhythm. It wasn't a win. It wasn't anything. It was just the way things had to be. The first signs of trouble came when the trucks stopped showing up. The shipping companies weren't taking deliveries anymore, not with the new fees hanging over their heads. Word spread fast. No one wanted to deal with that kind of hassle. The dock was a chokehold, and everyone with a business to run started looking for another route. It didn't take long for things to spiral. The seafood started spoiling. Crates piled up in the warehouse, untouched, because there was nowhere to move them. Orders started getting canceled. Buyers backed out of contracts. The ripple effect was quick and brutal. Her father didn't waste any time. He was desperate, but he'd always been proud. He wasn't about to admit that he couldn't fix it on his own, so he went to the bank. The conversation was short. They told him they couldn't help unless he mortgaged the main house, the one he'd worked his whole life to keep in the family. He did it, no hesitation. He signed whatever paperwork they put in front of him, hoping it would be enough to hold them over. It wasn't. Rick, always a step ahead, raised the toll fees again right before the holiday export season. The timing couldn't have been worse. The warehouse was already struggling, and now the fees were even higher. The docks were locked down tighter than ever, and their lifeline was hanging by a thread. I drove by the place once just to see it. I slowed as I passed the warehouse, the familiar stretch of road with its faded signs and crumbling concrete. The place looked different now, dark, abandoned almost. The ice machines were off, and the smell of salt and rot hung thick in the air. No trucks, no workers, just the quiet of a business falling apart. I didn't feel anything, not satisfaction, not guilt, just certainty. They had everything tied up in that dock, and now they had nothing. I'd known it would come to this, and it had. They'd pushed me out, treated me like I didn't matter, and now they were paying for it. I kept driving. The warehouse faded behind me, swallowed by the night. I didn't need to look back. I knew what was coming next. I was sitting in a diner, sipping my coffee, when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. A text from a friend. Her dad just lost it, stormed her house yelling your name. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in the drama. It was too late for any of them to change their minds, too late for anything to matter now. I opened my bank app and checked the wire transfer. It was still untouched. Across town, their family legacy was burning down, quietly, almost invisibly. No court dates, no screaming matches in the streets, just paperwork and time doing its job. The toll fees, the dock access, it was all happening exactly as planned. They'd never be able to undo it, not with the contracts in place. Not with the way things had shifted. They'd spend years fighting it, tying up resources, throwing money at lawyers and appeals. But they'd never get it back. The damage was done. I finished my coffee and slid the mug across the counter, waving for the check. The waitress came over and I handed her a tip that was a little bigger than usual. No reason to leave her with just the change. I wasn't a stranger to taking care of people who treated me right. I stood up, slipped my jacket on, and walked out into the sun. It was warm out, the light sharp and clear. As I stepped into the street, I felt the shift inside me. The game was over.